The invitation arrived 3 weeks late. Heavy cream cardstock, gold trim, meant to feel like honor, but landed like a warning. My cousin's wedding, hosted at the Silverfield estate, the same estate I pulled back from foreclosure, was funded with money to them. I was the quiet one, the unmarried cousin from Portland. They thought I lived off a modest trust, grateful just to be included. What they didn't know was that I owned 72% of everything they celebrated that night. I spent years in the background, watching them rewrite history with my name left out, until Avery handed me a tray and said, "You don't mind helping in the back, do you?" They expected me to serve in silence. Perfect. Because the best place to watch a dynasty crumble is from the shadows. And I wasn't going to stay quiet this time. Just before we get back to it, tell me where you're listening from. And if you've ever been written out of your own story, leave a comment, tap like, and make sure you're subscribed. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with elegant gold script that spelled out every detail of Daniel Whitmore's upcoming wedding. It should have felt like an honor, but as I held it in my hands, turning it over slowly, deliberately, something inside me whispered that it wasn't. The postmark confirmed it had been sent nearly 3 weeks after the others. I knew this because Archer, my assistant, had already seen our relatives posting about travel plans and dress fittings on social media. I set the invitation on my desk, letting it rest against the polished mahogany as I stared out my office window. 27 stories below. Portland moved with its usual Monday rhythm, cars weaving through traffic, people rushing with coffee cups in hand, unaware of the storm slowly brewing above them. Up here, though, it was quiet. I had built this sanctuary for exactly that reason. Peace, distance, control. The wedding would be held at Silverfield Estate, an idyllic vineyard nestled between the hills just outside of the city. It was the same estate I'd once saved from foreclosure. The same one that bore my fingerprints in every brick, every beam, every line of its balance sheet. 5 years ago, Daniel had come to me in tears. The family wine business was collapsing. They needed help. They needed me. I had mortgaged properties, restructured assets, negotiated contracts with banks and suppliers, all in silence, all without asking for recognition. I'd believed, back then, that legacy was something worth preserving. That family, even when it was flawed, was still worth saving. But that was before Avery came into the picture. My phone buzzed. Suite at Silverfield confirmed for the weekend. Shall I pack the usual? Archer's text was efficient, as always. Yes, I replied. And Archer, keep your phone on. I might need you. The drive to Silverfield felt like a journey backward in time. Rolling vineyards, weathered barns, familiar bends in the road that used to mean comfort. But as I passed through the wrought iron gates, a strange tightness settled in my chest. The estate looked beautiful, better than I'd imagined back when I toured the crumbling place with the realtor. The main house stood tall, its honey-colored stone glowing in the afternoon sun. The gardens were immaculate. It should have felt like home, but it didn't. I parked my modest sedan between a Mercedes and a BMW. The valet took my keys without eye contact. The staff, once warm and familiar, barely nodded in acknowledgement. I wasn't family anymore. At least, not in the way that counted. Inside, the welcome brunch was already underway. Laughter echoed through the halls. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Tables overflowed with fresh pastries and arrangements of early summer flowers. It looked like a celebration of legacy. But I could already feel it. The shift, the distance. And I hadn't even taken off my coat. The rehearsal began just after 3 o'clock. By then, the light had softened across the vineyard, casting long golden shadows over the lawn. Guests filtered into the ceremony area in clusters, cousins greeting one another with laughter, aunts adjusting boutonnieres, uncles reviewing schedules like they were coordinating a small war. I stood to the side, waiting for someone, anyone, to acknowledge my presence, to tell me where to sit. No one did. I scanned the neat rows of white chairs set up under the arbor, each seat marked with a calligraphy name card: Whitmore, Stanton, Briggs, Carter. But not my first name, not mine. I walked the aisle twice, just to be sure. Nothing. Finally, a young woman with a headset and clipboard approached me with a polite but apologetic smile. "Miss Carter." "Right. So sorry. We ran out of space in the family section. We'll just grab a folding chair for the back. It's just for today. Just for today." The words landed like a whisper through a closed door. I followed her silently to the edge of the seating area, where she set down a gray metal chair behind the last row. It wobbled slightly when I sat. I folded my hands in my lap and looked ahead, past the rows of family members, past the white floral arch, and toward the platform where Daniel stood, laughing with his groomsmen. He looked good, handsome in a fitted navy suit, confident in that effortless way he'd always had. He caught my eye for the briefest second, and then he looked away. I remembered a different version of him: barefoot summers at my parents' lake cabin, the smell of sunscreen and lemonade. I remembered him crying at his mother's funeral, clutching my hand like a lifeline. "You're the closest thing I've got to a sister," he'd whispered that day. But that Daniel was gone, replaced by someone who couldn't look at me now. Someone who, apparently, thought I belonged behind the family. After the rehearsal ended, I took the long way back to my guest room. The corridor that led to the bridal suite was partially open, the door ajar just enough to let sound drift out. Laughter, clinking glasses, a burst of music from someone's phone. I didn't intend to stop, but a name caught my ear. Madeline. A pause. Then, honestly, does anyone even know what she does? Another voice, light and flippant. Something with investments. "I think she just manages a trust fund. She's basically the family's ornamental rich cousin." Someone else chimed in. "Like, she shows up because no one has the heart to uninvite her." They laughed again, sharp and easy. Not cruel, exactly. Just casual. That kind of thoughtless cruelty that cuts deeper than malice ever could. I pressed myself against the wall just outside the doorway, my breath held in my chest. I knew those voices. Emily, Harper, Bryn. Women I'd grown up with. Women whose weddings I'd quietly paid deposits for when life blindsided their families. I'd never asked for recognition. I didn't want it. But I also never expected that my quiet support would turn me into a ghost. Present, but unseen. Or worse, misremembered as someone who'd never contributed anything at all. "Belle says she's sweet but kind of irrelevant," one of them added, "like she just drifts in and out. Irrelevant." I turned and walked away before I heard anything else. Back in my suite, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the faint creases in the duvet. My suitcase sat half open beside the closet. On the desk, the cream-colored invitations still lay untouched, like a relic from a world that no longer included me. I reached for my journal, the old one, leather-bound, pages soft from years of use. I flipped to a dated entry from the worst of the financial crisis. Daniel's voice cracked today. Said the bank was ready to foreclose by Friday. I told him not to panic. I'd figure something out. He called me his guardian angel, said I was the only one he trusted. I turned the page. Another entry. Signed the final documents. The estate is safe. The family can keep its dignity. No one ever has to know how close we came. I closed the journal gently and let it rest in my lap. They didn't just forget. They rewrote the story without me in it, and I'd let them, for years. But something in me was starting to shift. Not in anger, not yet, but in clarity. They had taken my silence as absence, my humility as irrelevant, my restraint as permission. They were wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. The vineyard outside my window shimmered beneath the silver wash of moonlight, each row of vines standing like quiet witnesses to a truth no one wanted to remember. I sat in the armchair by the window, wrapped in a blanket I didn't need, fingers tracing the edge of the leather journal that had once been my lifeline. I opened it to the years I rarely spoke of, the years no one else seemed to recall. The ink had faded slightly, but the words still carried weight. Meeting with the bank at 7 a.m. Daniel didn't show. I covered the mortgage payment again. Another $42,000. Told them it was a bridge loan from a silent partner. They never even asked my name. I turned the page. Supplier threatening legal action. No cash flow, no credit left. Liquidated the Ridgewood property to clear the debt. Told the family it was a private investor. Let them believe it was a miracle. And another. Midnight call from Uncle Raymond. Vineyard payroll bounced. Wired $65,000 from Carter & Coto. Told Archer to list it as anonymous operating support. Daniel called to thank me. Said I was the glue holding it all together. But glue cracks too. Under pressure. And no one ever sees it until the structure starts to shake. I sat there for hours, flipping through page after page, not of ego, not of pride, but of proof. Of history, no one else seemed willing to remember. They thought I just managed a trust fund. They thought I drifted in and out. They thought I was irrelevant. But I remembered. I remembered the early mornings I spent on conference calls with creditors in New York. The nights I stayed up reworking debt schedules while the rest of them toasted harvests with wine I had helped keep flowing. I remembered Avery's voice on speakerphone, chipper and confident, taking credit for her family's vision on an investor call, while I sat quietly on mute, holding the line and the liability. They celebrated survival without ever acknowledging who made it possible. I closed the journal and set it carefully on the nightstand. My hands were steady now. I picked up my phone and called Archer. He answered on the second ring. I was wondering when you'd call. Do you still have the compiled ledgers? I asked, my voice low. Every loan, every direct investment, every property transfer, all in the red binder, he replied. Do you want me to bring it? Not yet, I said. But get it ready. I think we may need the emergency protocol. The nuclear option, he murmured. Understood. Archer had been with me since the early days of Carter & Company, through every restructuring, every risk, every quiet rescue. He never asked why I insisted on documenting everything. He just built the systems to make it seamless. Also, I added, start a fresh list. Include anything recent tied to Silverfield Estate. I want full visibility, down to the cent. There was a pause. Then his voice returned, calm and clear. I'll start pulling statements now. We'll keep it clean. We'll keep it tight. I ended the call and set the phone down. They didn't know who I was anymore. Maybe they never had. But I did. I was the woman who had mortgaged her future to save their past. The woman who had given without needing applause, until the silence became a weapon used against her. They'd erased me. But the ledger never forgets. And neither did I. By the next evening, the welcome dinner was in full swing. The estate's terrace had been transformed. String lights floated above like captive stars, casting warm pools of light over elegantly dressed guests, sipping wine and trading compliments. The vineyard stretched out in every direction, golden and quiet beneath the fading sun. I lingered near the kitchen entrance, deliberately out of the way. I'd learned, over time, how to occupy the edges of family gatherings, present enough to avoid scrutiny, invisible enough to dodge commentary. It was safer there, easier, until it wasn't. Madeline. A bright voice called behind me. I turned and saw Avery Stanton weaving her way through the crowd, smiling as though this entire world belonged to her. In some ways it did, at least for now. "Oh, perfect timing," she said, her tone sugary and efficient. She held out a silver tray lined with crystal wine glasses, the stems catching light like tiny swords. "Since you're already standing by the kitchen," she continued, "maybe you could help circulate these. Just make sure everyone has what they need." Her voice carried, "Just enough." Heads turned, casual glances from relatives and vendors alike. A few held back smirks, others looked away. I didn't move. For a moment, I just stared at the tray. It was absurd, really. But not because I was above the task. I'd done far more humbling things in my life. What struck me wasn't the request, but the message behind it. It was deliberate. A performance. One meant to remind me, and everyone watching, that I wasn't part of the main cast anymore. That I belonged behind the scenes. Or better yet, nowhere at all. Avery tilted the tray slightly, urging it toward me. And for a heartbeat, I almost took it. The old me I would have smiled, nodded, and carried it around all evening, grateful just to be included. However, they chose to define that word. But that version of me no longer existed. I placed a hand on the table beside us, gently guiding the tray from her grip. "I think the professional staff has everything well in hand," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'll let them do their jobs." Her smile faltered. Just for a second. A flicker. But I saw it. Then it returned. Practiced and polished. "Of course," she said, tone cooling. "I just thought you might want to feel useful." The words landed softly as velvet and cut, just as deep. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. I turned and walked away, letting the clinking glasses and murmured conversations fade behind me. Back in my guest suite, I stood in front of the mirror, the reflection familiar yet changed. My navy dress was simple, my pearls understated. I looked like a woman who blended in by design. But beneath the fabric, beneath the surface, something had begun to shift. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was recognition. That years of loyalty had bought me silence. That generosity, offered without boundaries, had become permission for others to disregard me. I sat by the window, letting the quiet settle around me. The vineyard shimmered in the moonlight. The same vineyard I had saved from being auctioned off to strangers. The same land that now hosted a wedding I had made possible, without so much as a mention. I opened my journal again, almost without thinking. The next entry was dated 2 years after the rescue. Archer had just closed a refinancing deal that gave the estate breathing room. Daniel had sent a bottle of wine and a handwritten thank you note. No one else did. I reread my own handwriting. Sometimes the greatest kindness is letting people believe they saved themselves. But silence has a cost. And I'm beginning to wonder who's been paying it all these years. I closed the book gently and looked out at the flickering lights of the reception below. It used to feel like dignity. Now, it felt like disappearance. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to vanish anymore. The morning after the welcome dinner, I woke to the soft chime of a new email. Sunlight filtered through the linen curtains, painting warm streaks across the hardwood floor. For a moment, everything felt calm, still, almost ordinary. Until I saw the subject line Silverfield Summary. Urgent. I sat up and opened the message. Archer had attached a PDF labeled Confidential. Carter & Company, Financial Exposure, 5-year overview. I clicked it open. It was meticulous. As always, Archer didn't do anything halfway. The first few pages detailed familiar investments bridge loans I'd extended during the estate's renovation, payroll infusions during lean harvests, tax settlements I'd quietly resolved to protect the family name, all highlighted in pale blue. Page after page, line after line, almost $8 million in total support. But on page 14, something shifted. Mortgage application filed Stanton & Co. Ventures collateral listed Silverfield Estate held in Carter & Co. Trust amount, $2.7 million. Authorized signer, Madeline Carter. Date 3 months prior. I froze. I had never signed anything. Attached beneath it was a scanned copy of the loan agreement. My name, my company, my signature. Except it wasn't mine. It was close. Almost perfect. But Archer and I had long ago developed a system. A slight flourish in the D of my signature that didn't exist in the forgery. A private mark of authenticity. This document didn't have it. And the name beneath mine, Richard Stanton Avery's father. A man who, until last night, I hadn't spoken more than 5 words to in 2 years. My hands shook as I picked up my phone. Archer answered before the second ring. I figured you'd be calling, he said. That mortgage document, I said, trying to steady my breath. Tell me it's a mistake. It's not. It's been officially filed with the county. The loan cleared 2 weeks ago. Funds were transferred directly to an account under Stanton Event Consulting. 2.7 million. I whispered. Correct. And Madeline. It gets worse. I gripped the edge of the desk. How much worse? There are 3 other applications filed this week. Smaller, but all using Carter and Cody assets as collateral. Same forged signature. Same trail of shell companies. Someone's building a house of cards under your name. My voice was barely audible. Who else knows so far? Just me and the bank underwriters. They flagged the inconsistencies and held off on processing, but they won't wait forever. I told them you'd be in contact today. I pressed my fingers against my temple, trying to process the magnitude of what had just been revealed. They hadn't just dismissed me, disrespected me, or excluded me. They had stolen from me, deliberately, calculatingly, and they had signed my name to do it. I closed my eyes for a long moment, then opened them with clarity I hadn't felt in years. Archer, I need you to do 3 things. Say the word. 1. Freeze every account linked to Silverfield or any Stanton entity. Anything that touches my name, my company, or my assets. I want it locked down. Done. 2. Contact our legal team. I want a full fraud file opened. Include every forged document, every false claim, every unauthorized transaction. We're not brushing this aside. And the 3rd, prepare the red binder. There was a pause. The red binder. His voice had dropped an octave. Yes, every contribution, every bailout, every check I've ever written for this family, personal or professional. I want it documented, tabbed, and indexed. We may need it sooner than I thought. I'll have it in your hands by nightfall. I hung up and stared at the email again. At the number. At the forged name scrawled beside mine. At the gall of it. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I would keep smiling, keep giving, keep playing the role of the quiet benefactor who never asked questions. But they forgot something. Carter and Cody wasn't a trust fund. It was a fortress. And someone had just tried to breach the gates. By late morning, the estate came alive with the sound of heels on gravel and laughter echoing through the vineyard paths. Guests, mostly out-of-towners, gathered for a guided tour of Silverfield Estate, an event meant to showcase the venue's transformation from humble winery to luxury destination. I joined the back of the group quietly, not out of curiosity, but calculation. I needed to see how they told the story. Victoria, the hired wedding coordinator, greeted everyone with practiced warmth. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed. Welcome to Silverfield Estate. This property represents 3 generations of Whitmore legacy and vision, brought to new life through the efforts of Daniel Whitmore and his fiancée, Avery Stanton. A few guests clapped. Someone gasped softly. Victoria smiled, pleased. I said nothing. We passed the main house, its freshly painted shutters gleaming under the midday sun. The couple led the charge on this renovation. Victoria continued. From the redesign of the tasting room to the expansion of our private event spaces, every detail reflects their shared vision and business acumen. I looked at the stone terrace, one I'd personally funded when the estate couldn't make payroll for its contractors. We crossed into the vineyard. This portion of the property had nearly been lost to drought and financial hardship 5 years ago, she said, pausing for effect. Thanks to strategic investment and bold planning, Daniel and Avery restored it and built something extraordinary. Strategic investment. I wanted to laugh. That bold planning had come from 3 a.m. calls with bankers, a second mortgage on my Denver property, and Archer working weekends to reorganize a failing cash flow structure. Not once had Daniel attended those meetings. Not once had Avery even been in the room. But now the story belonged to them. The new wine club program, for example, Victoria said, gesturing to the elegant tasting room with its floor-to-ceiling windows, has already doubled membership and created a sustainable revenue model, all launched under their direction. The guests nodded approvingly. Someone asked what inspired the redesign. Avery's background in event marketing, Victoria replied smoothly, and Daniel's long-standing dedication to preserving family legacy. Family legacy. How quickly people forget whose hands held the crumbling bricks. As the group moved toward the vineyard overlook, I stepped back, letting space grow between us. I wandered into the rose garden, letting the scent of old blooms and morning dew settle around me. That's where I found her, sitting on a wrought iron bench, cane resting beside her, pale blue scarf tucked neatly into her jacket. Eleanor Carter, our family's quiet matriarch. She looked up as I approached, and her smile was soft but knowing. Charlotte, she said, using my middle name, the one she preferred. Walk with me. I took her arm, and we moved slowly past the hedges toward a shaded path that overlooked the western slope of the vineyard. I saw your face during the tour, she said after a long silence. I thought I was hiding it well. She chuckled once, lightly. No one hides that kind of disappointment well. Not from someone who remembers how this place used to look. We stopped by the stone wall, where the vines met the horizon. She leaned gently against it. They've forgotten, you know, she said quietly. What you did. What you gave. I didn't do it to be remembered. No, you didn't, she nodded. And that's exactly why they should have remembered. I didn't speak. The truth of it stung too deeply. She turned to face me, eyes sharp behind decades of wisdom. You're Margaret's daughter. She taught you to work hard, to give freely, to stay humble. But she also taught you not to let people erase you. I looked out over the vines, blinking slowly. I thought staying quiet was the higher ground. Maybe it was, for a time. But humility isn't invisibility. And grace doesn't mean silence when your name is being replaced in your own story. I felt something in me shift at those words. Something subtle. Something strong. Eleanor reached out, took my hand, and squeezed it once. Let them tell their version, she said. But you don't have to sit quietly in the back while they pass your legacy around like a party favor. You've built too much to disappear now. Then she turned and walked away, her cane tapping gently against the stone path. And I stood there for a long while, listening to the wind move through the vineyard I'd saved, the vines I'd rescued, the soil I'd poured my resources into when no one else could. They could rewrite the story, but they could never change who wrote the first chapter. The cocktail hour unfolded like a scene from a lifestyle magazine. Perfect lighting, curated laughter, strings of jazz notes drifting from the terrace. Champagne flowed like no one had a care in the world. I stood just beyond the glow, watching the edges, not unlike the way I'd lived for the last decade, close enough to hold everything together, far enough to be forgotten when the lights came on. A few guests passed by with polite nods. No one stopped to speak. No one looked twice. To them, I was still just Madeline, that distant cousin from Portland who showed up to family events in modest heels and quiet restraint. It didn't matter that I had paid for some of their flights here, or their children's school tuition, or their parents' hospital stays. But one person saw me. "Here," a voice said gently. I turned. Samantha Briggs stood beside me, wine glass in one hand, a deep red folder in the other. She looked radiant, healthy, confident. So different from the last time I'd seen her, lying pale and terrified in a hospital bed, waiting to hear whether her experimental cancer treatment would be approved. It hadn't been, but I had made a few calls, moved a few funds, covered it all without a word. Samantha offered the folder. "Archer asked me to pass this along," he said. "You'll know when to open it." My fingers closed around the folder before I could even think. It was heavier than I expected. I didn't have to look inside to know what it contained. It was the truth. "Sam," I began, but she held up her hand. "You don't need to thank me. I just want you to know. I remember. I always have. And I think it's time the rest of them do too." She placed a soft hand on my shoulder, then melted back into the crowd. I held the red folder close as I walked toward a quieter corner of the terrace. The hum of conversation blurred into static. My thoughts narrowed, focused. I opened it slowly. Inside were neatly printed pages, tabbed and indexed. Archer had outdone himself. Each section detailed a different chapter of my hidden legacy estate rescue: $420,000 in emergency bridge funding, $1.2 million in asset reallocation, 3 full mortgage payments, unacknowledged, undocumented, but critical. Medical expenses: Samantha's cancer treatment, $168,000. Aunt Doreen's spinal surgery, $52,000. 2 psychiatric rehab programs for extended cousins. All anonymous. All approved by me. Tuition bailouts, legal fees, business loans. Cousin Michael's law school. Uncle David's bankruptcy filing. Juliet's divorce settlement. Over $2.3 million in total. All signed by me. All forgotten. And yet, they called me irrelevant. As I flipped to the final tab, my own signature stared back at me, real and forged, side by side. Archer had included a forensic comparison of my actual penmanship and the fake one submitted by Richard Stanton. The difference was subtle, but it was there. And now, it was documented. I closed the folder and looked out over the vineyard again. The lights twinkled like nothing had ever gone wrong, like no one had stolen a single cent, like I hadn't been erased from the story they now told with pride. But that was about to change. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about embarrassment, or ego, or even the betrayal that had carved something hollow inside me. It was about truth. They had mistaken silence for weakness, generosity for disposability, legacy for decoration, and they had no idea that I had receipts. I tucked the red folder beneath my arm and took a deep breath. The storm hadn't started yet. But the sky was about to break. The morning of the wedding dawned impossibly clear. Golden light spilled across Silverfield like it had been ordered from a catalog. Vineyard rows glowing, dew shimmering along the terrace railing, and the distant hum of delivery trucks arriving with linens, flowers, sound equipment. From my window, it all looked effortless, beautiful, deceptive. I was just finishing my coffee when the knock came. A young man stood outside, clipboard in hand, headset crackling faintly. He wore a navy polo with event team embroidered across the chest. "Ms. Carter," he asked, smiling. "Hi, I'm Jake with the coordination crew. The bride said you'd be available to help with parking logistics this morning. We're short a few volunteers. And she mentioned you'd be perfect. I stared at him, trying to process what I'd just heard. Parking logistics. At my cousin's wedding. Held on property I had saved from foreclosure. Jake, still smiling politely, glanced at his clipboard. Charlotte. Sorry. Madeline Carter. Yeah. Right here. Bride's request. He wasn't being cruel. He was reading a list. Following orders. But the weight behind those words nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. I spoke carefully. There must be some confusion. I'm a guest at this wedding, not part of the staff. Jake looked genuinely puzzled. Oh, I mean, the bride just said you were really good at handling background stuff. Background stuff. My hands curled around the doorknob, steadying myself. I won't be available for that. But thank you. He nodded quickly, embarrassed now. Right. No problem. I'll let her know. As the door closed softly behind me, the heat in my chest spread like wildfire. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't subtle anymore. They weren't even pretending to hide it. They wanted me boxed in, pushed to the back, stripped of dignity by degrees. And this morning, it had a name: parking logistics. My phone buzzed on the desk. Incoming call, Archer. I answered without greeting. I just found 3 more, he said. Loan applications. Filed this week. All using Carter & Co. as collateral. I closed my eyes. Same forged signature. Yes. Slightly sloppier this time. But still filed. Still processed. How much collectively? Another $1.1 million. One's already been wired to a Stanton family holding account. The other 2 are pending approval. I didn't speak. Archer did. Madeline. They're accelerating. They think they can run the clock out before anyone notices. A knock. A clipboard. A list. My name. At the bottom. They don't think I'll stop them, I said quietly. They think I'll stay polite. Quiet. Grateful just to be invited. Well, Archer replied, his voice steady. They're about to learn who they're dealing with. I walked across the room, pulled open the closet, and reached for the dress I'd chosen 2 days ago. Simple navy silk, pearls, low heels, everything they expected me to wear, everything they expected me to be. I laid it out on the bed, and then I picked up the red folder. The weight of it grounded me. It was more than documentation. It was a reckoning. No more hiding, no more background roles. Because silence doesn't protect you when you're dealing with people who believe your value ends where their comfort begins. They weren't just rewriting my place in the story. They were using my name to bankroll the entire performance. And if I didn't step in now, they wouldn't just erase me. They would destroy me. I looked out the window one last time. The musicians had arrived. Florists were placing white roses at the edge of the arbor. Guests were beginning to gather. Avery would walk down that aisle, believing she had orchestrated perfection. Daniel would stand beside her, unaware he was standing on stolen ground. But not for long. I picked up my phone and dialed Archer again. It's time, I said. He didn't ask for clarification. Then let's begin. The reception sparkled. From the hilltop terrace, Silverfield looked like something out of a dream. Table linens billowing gently in the breeze, candlelight flickering across crystal glasses, and rows of white roses cascading from the arbor where Daniel and Avery had just exchanged vows. The quartet played a soft jazz arrangement while guests sipped champagne and posed for photos beneath a sky slowly turning indigo. It was the kind of night people would talk about for years. And it was built entirely on a lie. From my seat, deliberately distant, but this time with an actual chair, I watched it unfold like theater. The perfect wedding, the perfect couple, the perfect future. All of it paid for by stolen signatures and forged documents. My phone vibrated against my clutch. A text from Archer. Bank confirms all Stanton loans are fraudulent. Legal team standing by. Power company says estate account delinquent. Shut off scheduled for 900 p.m. I looked at my watch. 8:15. I had 45 minutes to make a choice. I could cover the payments. Again. Quietly. Like always. I could wire funds. Authorize accounts. Delay the inevitable until Avery and Daniel were back from their honeymoon and someone else became the next collateral sacrifice. Or I could let it fall. I stood and stepped away from the table, moving through the crowd unnoticed. A few guests gave polite nods. No one stopped me. No one asked why I wasn't smiling, why my glass was still full, why my silence now had a different weight. I reached the edge of the vineyard, where the music became a faint hum, and pulled out my phone. "Archer," I said when he picked up. "Pull the plug." There was no hesitation, freezing all vendor payments now. Notifying the utility provider, sending fraud reports to state authorities and the DA's office. Are you sure? I looked back at the glowing terrace, at Avery in her designer gown, at Daniel, laughing with his groomsmen like nothing had ever been broken. "I'm sure," I said. "Let it all collapse." I ended the call and slipped the phone into my bag, and waited. The first sign came 20 minutes later. A quiet disturbance by the catering tent. Raised voices. A flurry of movement. Through the gauze of fairy lights, I saw the head chef on the phone, pacing in small circles. "No. I understand the payment was declined. But we're in the middle of service." "What do you mean?" "Disputed by Carter and Cody." The music played on, but the tension had begun to ripple. I rejoined the reception, lingering near the edge, just close enough to watch the unraveling. The photographer's assistant stopped shooting. The DJ walked back and forth between two generators, whispering into a headset. The florist stood near the bar, checking her phone with furrowed brows. Then, at 8:45 it happened. The jazz trio's sound system cut out mid-measure. A few guests clapped nervously, thinking it was planned. But then the courtyard lights began to flicker. Once, twice, before dimming entirely. The chatter died. Then came the silence. It wasn't sudden. It crept in like a fog. Soft. Strange. Disorienting. The soft glow of fairy lights blinked out section by section, until the terrace stood in shadow, lit only by cell phone screens and flickering votives fighting to stay lit. Avery rushed to the center, whispering furiously to the coordinator. Daniel followed close behind, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the darkness as if trying to make sense of it. "What do you mean we lost power?" Avery hissed. "Get the backup generators. Now." The coordinator nodded, already dialing. But I knew they wouldn't work. I'd pulled the authorization last month, quietly, just in case. Now, the silence belonged to them. I watched as reality began to press in. The guests were murmuring. Some fumbled with flashlights. Others whispered about refunds and cancellations. The illusion of perfection had fractured. And in that moment, something inside me eased. It wasn't vengeance. It was clarity. I wasn't punishing them. I was simply refusing to protect them anymore. I had spent years holding up the walls of this family with both hands, never asking to be seen. And now, with one decision, one whispered instruction, I had let go. The lights had gone out, and for once, I wasn't the one left in the dark. The lights had barely faded before the murmurs began to swell, first in pockets, then across the entire terrace. Guests whispered theories, speculations, confusion dressed as concern. But beneath it all was something else. Fear. Vendors started packing. Quietly. Efficiently. The florist's assistants dismantled arrangements with downcast eyes. The catering staff wheeled untouched courses back to the kitchen. The jazz trio stood silently beside their now useless equipment. And in the center of it all, Avery Stanton spun in slow, panicked circles, her silk gown trailing behind her like a broken promise. She barked into her phone, gesturing wildly at nothing, as if rage alone could reverse the collapse. Across the terrace, Daniel stood frozen, his jaw tight, watching everything slip through his fingers. But I didn't move. Because this moment wasn't mine to chase, it was theirs to face. That's when Samantha appeared. She moved through the shadows with quiet resolve. A stack of crimson folders clutched tightly to her chest. One by one, she handed them out, each one addressed with precision. Uncle Howard, Aunt Doreen, Cousin Michael, Great-Uncle Robert, people who had sat on committees, controlled trust allocations, and held the family narrative in their hands for years. Each folder opened slowly, hesitantly, and then, gasps, brows furrowed, eyes scanning the page once, then again. Uncle Robert sat down hard in the nearest chair, as if the weight of the truth had knocked the wind out of him. Aunt Doreen whispered something I couldn't hear and covered her mouth with trembling fingers. And then came the voice that silenced the rest. Madeline. It was Eleanor Carter, standing, cane in hand, at the edge of the terrace. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't have to. Authority lived in her posture. Command sat in her bones. Madeline, would you join us? Please, I stepped forward. Slowly, calmly. The red folder still tucked beneath my arm. The circle of family parted. All eyes turned toward me, not with pity, not with confusion, but with dawning recognition. Eleanor held up one of the documents. Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with restrained fire. These records show you own 72% of the family's holdings, she said, scanning the room. The estate, the winery, the emergency funds, the operating capital, even the trust's secondary assets. It's all here, in her name. A wave of stunned silence followed. Avery staggered forward. That's not possible, she said, voice cracking. She's not what Eleanor asked coolly. Daniel looked at me, his face pale, lips parted but speechless. I met his gaze, and I didn't look away. I'm the one who saved this estate, I said. When the banks came calling, I was the one who wrote the checks. When the vineyard was weeks from default, I was the one who mortgaged my future to preserve your past. I restructured the family business. I paid for the things no one wanted to talk about. And I did it all, without asking for credit. But you forged her signature, Eleanor said, turning to Avery. You used her company to secure your loans. You built this entire wedding on money that wasn't yours. Avery's mouth opened and closed. We didn't know, she whispered. We thought she was just the quiet one. That was your mistake, I replied. You confused silence with insignificance. And you built your empire on borrowed power. Daniel stepped forward, desperation in his voice. Madeline, I didn't know. I swear. I didn't know about the loans, about the signatures. But you knew about me. I said, you knew what I'd done. And you let her treat me like furniture, like I was just someone who showed up. The crowd had stilled. Not a fork clinked, not a glass moved. And for the first time, I wasn't a shadow in someone else's celebration. I was the storm they hadn't seen coming. Because the truth, when spoken plainly, doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand still long enough for everyone to hear it. After the truth landed, the reception didn't so much end as unravel. Guests left in quiet clusters, some offering awkward condolences, others simply avoiding eye contact as they disappeared into the night. The string lights never came back on. The jazz trio had long since packed up their instruments, and there, in the stillness that followed, I stood, no longer overlooked, no longer silent. But the storm wasn't over. As the crowd thinned, I noticed Eleanor standing near the stone steps that led back toward the house, speaking in low, urgent tones to several of the family's senior members. I caught phrases, legal adjustments, unacceptable oversight, and permanent consequences. When their quiet huddle broke, she motioned to me. I walked toward her slowly, steady on my feet, red folder still tucked under one arm. "Madeline," she said, voice firm but not unkind. "We need to speak, privately, but with clarity." I nodded. Of course. The others stood nearby but didn't interrupt. Eleanor took my hand. Not ceremonially, not with pageantry, but with purpose. "As of tonight," she said, "I'm making changes to my estate plan, effective immediately." I blinked. "Eleanor," she held up a hand, "you earned the right to be heard. Now let me speak." Her eyes, sharp despite her age, met mine without wavering. "You are now the executor of my estate. I've already spoken to the attorney. The lake house, the stock portfolio, the family archives, they'll pass to you. And Daniel," she paused, "will be removed from all fiduciary roles. Completely." The words landed like soft thunder. Around us, the remaining family fell still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "I don't want," I started. She stopped me again. "I know what you don't want. But this isn't about wanting anymore. It's about what's right. And it's about time the family stopped mistaking humility for invisibility." Daniel had heard everything. He stepped forward now, his face slack with disbelief, voice barely above a whisper. "Please, don't do this." Eleanor didn't respond. He turned to me instead, his eyes glassy. "Madeline, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I swear, I didn't know what my father-in-law was doing. I didn't know she forged anything. I didn't—" He broke off, swallowed hard. "I was stupid. I let her twist the way I saw you. I let her treat you like a footnote. And I didn't stop it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." His voice cracked. And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't seen in him for years. Not charm, not confidence, not the polished air everyone adored. I saw the boy who once cried at the lake house, asking if I would always be there. And I saw how far we had drifted since then. "I believe you," I said quietly. "But that doesn't make it right." He looked down. "You stood by while I was erased." I continued. "Not by strangers, by people you loved. And you let it happen because it was easier, because it kept your image intact." "I didn't know how to fix it," he whispered. "You don't get to fix it," I said gently. "Not this time. You don't get to cry and hand me a tray and hope I'll carry the weight again." He nodded, tears sliding silently down his face. "I should have protected you," he said. "But you didn't," I replied. "And I finally stopped protecting you too." Eleanor stepped forward again, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "The family needs new leadership," she said. "Not just someone who saves them, but someone who holds them accountable." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood still and let it happen. Because this wasn't revenge. It was a responsibility. And this time, it was mine. 3 months later, I stood on the deck of my new home in Portland, cradling a mug of tea as the morning mist rolled in from the coast. The house was modest by design. No sweeping marble staircases, no curated vineyard views, just cedar shingles, soft light, and quiet corners. For the first time in years, everything around me felt chosen, not inherited, not expected, not performed. I had walked away from Silverfield with more than legal control. I had walked away with clarity. The Carter and Coda accounts had been stabilized. The fraudulent loans were reversed, and restitution was filed, Richard Stanton was facing federal charges. Avery was cooperating. Daniel had gone quiet. His last letter, handwritten and heavy with regret, still sat unopened in the bottom drawer of my desk. Maybe one day I'll read it. But not today. Today belonged to something new. The Atlas Foundation, my first project post-Silverfield, had quietly launched the month after the wedding. Its mission was simple: invest in young women building businesses the world too often overlooks. No strings, no debts disguised as gifts, just capital, mentorship, and a chance to rise. This wasn't giving in out of guilt, or shame, or familial obligation. This was power, redirected with intention. I'd already met with a dozen founders, bright, scrappy, relentless women with big ideas and no safety nets. One of them, Kala, had just signed a deal with a major organic grocer for her sustainable packaging startup. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said last week, eyes sparkling with disbelief. But she could. She just needed someone to see her, just like I had once needed someone to see me. My phone buzzed on the counter behind me. A message from Archer. "New round of grant applications is ready for review. Also, dinner tomorrow. Found a quiet place with a view. Thought you might like it." I smiled as I typed back, "Perfect. And thank you for everything." His reply came instantly. "You would have done it without me. You just finally realized you were allowed to." As the morning sun broke through the fog, I looked out toward the sea, wide, endless, and full of possibility. I thought about all the years I spent trying to earn love through silence, all the nights I convinced myself that being invisible was noble, all the times I wrote checks and swallowed hurt, thinking that dignity meant disappearing. But now I gave because I wanted to, because I believed in something greater than applause. And this time, I didn't have to dim my light to be accepted. I was no longer helping from the shadows. I had stepped into the sun, and I wasn't leaving it again. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or erased, this story was for you. Leave a comment, share your story, and don't forget to subscribe, because the quiet ones, we're not so quiet anymore.